Welcome to the 6 Ways to Sunday podcast, hosted by award-winning television director, documentary filmmaker, author, and speaker Craig D. Forrest. Join Craig for the next few minutes as he interviews leaders, artists, and creatives about trends and insights shaping our digital world and faith-based media. This podcast is produced and brought to you by Matchstick Media International. Now, here's Craig.
We are talking today to Dr. Craig Detweiler, who is a professor of communication at Pepperdine University. Previously, he was at Fuller Theological Seminary, and before that, he was the department head of cinema and media arts at Biola University, also part of the Biola Media Conference in years past. 90% of Christian television right now, Christian media, is either an evangelist, a missionary, but most likely a pastor, speaking from their church, and it's their Sunday morning program, Sunday morning message. There are other more creative ways that you can share the gospel, and the 3 or 4 that I came up with, and I hammer them kind of hard. One is documentaries. There's never been a greater time with equipment that's very inexpensive or in your hands to tell stories via documentary format. The second is short films. The third is music video. If you've got anyone in your church that's decent, or in your group ministry that's good at singing, you could do a music video. Just shoot it from 27 angles if it's performance, or do the story part of it. And the other is children's media. There's not enough children's media that I believe that's out there. Talk about any of those. I'll let you do the salad bar thing, and you pick any of those that you want, and where they are now and where they could go in the future.
Well, we often maybe would highlight someone in the congregation to maybe quote unquote give their testimony or talk about something God's done in their life. But you could just as easily create those as 2-3 minute pieces featuring members of the congregation that are in documentary format, where you literally just follow them into their workplace or follow them into their neighborhoods and allow them to talk about what they're seeing God do in their life and in their community. It's very easy to do. It could take you, as little as an hour, 2 hours to kind of shoot and put that type of online documentary testimony together. When it comes to short films, it can take a little more work, but what a fun process maybe for a youth group to work through.
Exactly.
To think about what message they'd like to communicate to their peers and how they might, write and shoot and edit and even score that kind of short film. And then they own this thing and have a sense of how they're caring for their neighbors in a enculturated way. When it comes to kids ministry, I agree. There's really isn't enough good content for children. Club Penguin, believe it or not, was started by some Christian dads who were concerned that there wasn't a good, safe place for kids online.
Okay.
So they started coding that and creating that world. And, a few years later, Disney bought it for $300 million.
Whoa.
Yeah, but that's
a lot of penguins.
That's a lot of penguins and a lot of digital ice,
Exactly.
But that was really about parents just wanting to find a safe place for their kids to play online. Yeah. So it just, I guess, shows you what's possible if the things that concern you, if you create positive outlets and alternatives for people.
Exactly. Let me ask you a question that isn't a book that I've been getting into as well, called The Hidden Power of the Electronic Culture by, I think it's Shane Higgins, if I've got it right.
Shane Hips. I know
Hips,
Shane.
There you go.
I know Shane, yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting is really hammering hard is how do we live our faith in a media-drenched culture? So how do we live our faith in a media-drenched culture, Craig?
Well, I find I have to take regular breaks. I think the challenge is to bracket these electronic prompts, these digital devices that are setting a different kind of agenda or schedule for us. So it might mean responding to an email immediately, but it also might mean letting things sit for a day before I respond. That the urgency that seems to always be behind these texts and tweets may not need to be attended to immediately. And so, but only if you step back for, a few hours at a time or even a day at a time, whether you take a electronic Sabbath on a Sunday, do you start to gain some perspective about what matters and to separate the eternal from the urgent, and realize that, that there are things beyond the electronic immediacy that may endure. And so you can maybe set yourself on a longer path. Well, I think it comes from how we order our day. If the first thing we do is check in with our cell phone and figure out what prompts we've gotten, then we're already off on a bad foot, because we're letting something set our agenda and our priorities other than maybe checking in with God and sort of saying, what would you have for me today? Who do I need to care for? What do I need to do? Where do I need to go? Our schedule can create a certain order to our day, but I want to leave room for the Spirit to move. I also find that by taking an electronic Sabbath, once a week, that it can be a great way to kind of put the iGods in their place. And to, that by powering down, we make more room to power up and connect with God.
We're talking to media thought leader, filmmaker, and award-winning screenwriter Craig Detweiler on the podcast. Great conversation. We'll be back in 32 seconds after the break.
This podcast features engaging conversations with leaders, artists, and creatives sharing about current trends and insights shaping our digital world and faith-based media. Today's episode is produced by Matchstick Media International, a nonprofit that's passionate about inspiring both visionary leaders and young creatives to harness the power of media to further the gospel. To learn more, visit us at matchstickmedia.org. Now, back to Craig.
We're back having a wonderful conversation with Craig Detweiler, media thought leader, who has a lot to say about our digital world. I do a lot of travel overseas, and I find that when I'm in a hotel room far away, or on the airplane especially, sitting in my seat, that I have more time to read, more time to think. I'm not connected with either my iPad or a mobile phone to the outside world. Now that's changed, or in changing depending on your airline, because you can connect up easily to Wi-Fi on the plane now.
Right.
But I prefer not to. I would rather have those 9 hours on the flight to Europe or Asia, wherever it is. It's sort of like that quiet time of just looking at God's eternal universe outside my window and the clouds and the oceans and the mountains. And I actually get a lot more done when I'm not connected up to media. How does one take a digital Sabbath away? How do you do it?
Well, it's interesting. I actually put it in my classes as an assignment.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In my media classes, students have to have one day where they turn off all electronics for 24 hours. And it initially drives them crazy.
Yeah, I bet.
Possibly do this. And yet what they discover is if they do dare to turn off the car radio, if they do dare to turn off their laptop, to not, log in to their email, that a lot of things happen. One is their parents freak out. and it's interesting how many parents are sort of constantly checking in with their kids, and if they don't get an immediate text back, they assume the worst. So the kids have to kind of warn their parents, I may not respond right now, and it doesn't mean that I'm dead.
Or been abducted by somebody.
Exactly. But what happens is some will immediately, they'll usually say, it seemed like it was going to be the most boring day ever. And then they'll maybe go for a hike, or they'll go to the mountains, they'll go for a long bike ride, and they'll do something that they normally wouldn't do, often getting outside. Or they'll actually take a nap, and they'll discover, man, I was really tired. I needed a nap.
Exactly.
Some will also start reading books and reading assignments and other work that they have to do. And they'll realize that they can do a week's worth of homework in 2 or 3 hours if they just didn't have those other distractions that are kind of constantly dividing our attention. So this idea that we have, that we can multitask it's actually a myth. We can really only focus on one thing at a time. And so when you actually cut out some of those electronic distractions and really do that, you have better time for mental health, for physical health, for spiritual health, and you might actually get more done.
And there's a thinking, especially in the West, that we're so task-oriented that sometimes we just lose it. We're not into relationship as much. We're into getting our list of things done. And then you're talking about distractions. In such a media-driven world, there's a term that a friend uses. How do you cut through the clutter? So, talking with Craig Detweiler, professor at Pepperdine University, professor of communication, how do we cut through the clutter of the media that's all around us?
Well, the need for discernment and wisdom, I don't think, has ever been greater. The ability to focus on one thing, the ability to go deep, the ability to analyze and to synthesize information, I don't think has ever been more important. And I feel like those who will lead in the future are not the ones who are fractured in their thinking and aware of what's going on in 12 different areas, but those that can focus on the one area or the one thought or the one task that really matters and do it in an orderly fashion. So for my exams, I allow students to bring in all electronic media that they want. They can bring in laptops, cell phones, textbooks. I don't care. Because we're always in our jobs, day-to-day lives, going to be surrounded by too much information. The real genius in the 21st century will be to sort through the information quickly and discern what matters, and to be able to synthesize your thoughts and analyze kind of the truth that stands out amidst a lot of distraction.
I always ask as my final question, even in documentaries and video, Craig, is there anything I haven't asked you that you wanted to talk about? If so, what would it be?
No, I feel like we've covered a waterfront of possibilities, and I'm excited by what the next generation will find and discover in their efforts to communicate ancient truths in new ways.
Dr. Craig Detweiler, thank you very much.
You've been listening to the 6 Ways to Sunday podcast with Craig D. Forrest, brought to you by Matchstick Media International, dedicated to excellence in media through inspiration, vision, and education. To learn more, visit us on the web at matchstickmedia.org. That's matchstickmedia.org. Your generous donations, large or small, help defray costs for producing this creative podcast. Thanks for listening and subscribing.